Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Time to Calibrate podcast. If you're a first-time listener, glad to have you aboard. Bob here from the YouTube channel, Time to Go Travel and Timepieces, and I'm joined by our hosts, Marc, writer at Worn and Wound, and Brent from the Calibrated Wrist. Today, we are going to be talking about something that I think is a highlight of the year for all three of us when it comes to watches, the Toronto Timepiece Show. For me, it's probably a peak point in time since I've been into watches. But speaking of watches, what does everyone have on wrist today? Let's start with Brent.
Well, Bob, good to see you guys again. And what a fantastic show. In fact, what I've got on wrist today, it came from the show. It came from Coin Watch Co., who was displaying a lot of vintage and used things there. And, you know, I've always had a soft spot for Longines, and I've been hunting for that perfect Longines. And they've got a lot of really great stuff out there, like the Zulu Time and the Conquest GMT. But after I visited Longines earlier in the year in Switzerland, and I got to learn a lot more about the history of the brand, I thought, you know, I really want something kind of emblematic from their past. And it was almost as though Coin Watch Co. had been curating my Chrono 24 page when I walked in. And I saw this particular watch. So what I've got on right now is the Longines 8024, which was their very first high beat caliber, the caliber 431. And I really love it. I love the design. I love the sort of color of the dial, also the rose gold highlights and all of that kind of stuff. But it was one of two pickups that I got on that day, and I've been wearing it pretty much every day since.
And what was the second watch that you got that day?
It was a gold Omega Genève from, 1977. The Longines comes from 1969, actually. And yeah, I really love that one too. It runs the caliber 1030, and it's a beautiful movement. I opened it up the other day. I just, you know, my curiosity got the best of me.
Very nice. How about yourself, Marc?
I've got my Hamilton Khaki Expedition. Just absolutely adoring it. It's one of my favorite watches right now. I wear it most of the time. It's just very comfortable and thin. And Robi, about your Longines, again, I always do this. Going back a long time ago, there used to be a Longines dealer near the Grand Central Station here in Montreal. This tiny little place, basically under an escalator. And I used to walk by it, and they used to have the hour angle. I don't know if you guys remember that watch with all the numerals on the dials. And every time I walked by, I kept on thinking, that's a really cool watch. And I stopped in once to have a look at it, and I was really impressed. And they had the Admiral watch, which was one of the original ones with the 5 stars on the dial before Conquest even came in. I mean, it was really cool. So congratulations on the pickup. You did really well. It's a really cool watch.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. You know, what's interesting to me is, like, if you want to get into a brand vintage-wise, whether it's Omega or Longines or whatever, you're usually looking at a pretty high entry-level point, right? Like, even if you're talking about Longines, if you want yourself a super compressor, the original, the one they're calling the Legend Diver now, or if you want the Wittenauer Big Eye Skin Diver or something, you're looking at north of $10,000, sometimes north of $30,000, especially if you're getting yourself a 13ZN chronograph or something like that. So, you know, to find these little gems that have yet to be sort of rediscovered and then, of course, repopularized, and then, of course, drive up prices, it's really something. Like this one, I think it was launched in 1967 originally, and then they replaced the movement in 1972. So, you know, it's got that really nice little niche area, a little piece of horological history. So, yeah, I'm really enjoying it.
So what you're saying is that we should not be talking about it.
Yeah, we'll edit that out of the pod.
What about you, Bob?
So I also walked away with a couple of watches from the show, and one of the brands that I was most excited to see, only because I've known the owner for years but had never met in person, was Ivan from Vario Watches. And I was eyeballing one of his watches. I'm wearing it today, the Navi Single Hand, and ended up picking it up. And it's a very unique wearing experience, having no minute hand on a watch. I see even right now we've started about 20 minutes late, and that's possibly due to this watch. But yeah,
that's a cool one too.
Yeah, it's a neat watch. We're heading up to the cottage this weekend where time doesn't matter so much. So this is going to be the go-to over the weekend up there. But So we all shared different experiences at the show. Marc and I shared a similar experience most of Saturday and Sunday, working the table with Jose from Isotope Watches, which was a lot of fun. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that. But you were all over the place creating content, Brent. I know you also moderated some talks at the show, and it was great meeting your wife, and both of your kids were there too. So that was awesome. But was there any standout moments at the show, or a moment that that comes to mind?
It was actually one of the talks, and then things that spun out after that talk. And it was probably with Alexandre Beauregard from Montreal. I mean, for starters, what an incredible person, and what an easy guy to talk to, and what an absolute craftsman, and so humble and so modest. And we're looking at watches, for example, the highest end of what he's creating sometimes goes for $250,000 or more. So we're really talking about haute horlogerie, and we're talking about haute joaillerie, because he really is a lapidary artist. He works with gemstones, etc., and he teams up with some of the most creative minds in horology in Switzerland. So he splits his time between Montreal and Geneva. So in the past, he created mostly watches for women. And if you get a chance to take a look at the Candy, for example, you could literally pick that thing up and lick it. It looks that amazing. It looks delicious. But what really impressed me the most is the Ulysse. And he happened to have an iteration of that on his wrist. Now, of the original Ulysse, there are only 10. So these are not something that you're going to find laying around in an AD somewhere. And ultimately, it was a creation he did with Vianney Halter. And Vianney Halter, for listeners that aren't aware, he is, again, in the upper echelons of haute horlogerie. He's been like the 3-time winner of the GPHG. And next to, oddly, the Ulysse Nardin Freak, I think this is the most expensive watch I've ever held in my hand, and it certainly is the most beautiful that I've ever held in my hand. For listeners, essentially, it looks like a stained glass window, and rather than everything being held together with lead, it's held together with rose gold. So you have about 68 different components, cut gems of the highest grade, and then underneath that, he's laid mother of pearl, and because of that, it actually has a shine that looks like you are looking at an actual stained glass window, and the light is pouring through. It's really something, a real piece of craftsmanship. And of course, he's got this beautiful movement on the inside from Vianney Halter. And, that for me was definitely a highlight, to have actually touched it, held it, and then talked to the guy who actually made it. And in fact, we have made a tentative date to have some dinner in Montreal so that we can check out his studio. Caroline's going to come along. She's going to do some videography and things like that. So I'm really looking forward to that. And to me, the weekend was all about that. It was about meeting people for the first time, like even you, Marc. We finally met together face-to-face for the first time. But then it's the spin-off that happens from that, that sort of that collaboration, all these wonderful creators and watchmakers meeting in one place, and the sort of side deals and the propositions that spin out from that. I really think, for me, absolute highlight of the show. Yeah,
for sure. Beauregard is, for listeners who've never heard of him, Vianney Halter, Kari Voutilainen, MBNF, all these magical creators, and we have that here in Quebec, in Canada, building these things. It's outstanding. It was really cool to have him at the show.
The other person that stood out to me, speaking of Canadians, was, and he was not, he didn't have a table at the show, but I know you experienced this firsthand, Marc, because I was there with you. I'm not sure about yourself, Brent, but Soroyer, I think is how you pronounce, where he's making every single component of that movement out in Saskatoon. Beautiful watch. He was excellent to talk to. We've actually discussed a little bit. I haven't mentioned it to you guys about him maybe coming even on the show at some point in time, because he's a really interesting person, and there's not too many people out there. He believes there's only a couple of people in North America that are doing what he's doing to that scale, as far as building every little component. of those movements. So that was kind of a highlight for me. And that was while we were working the booth at Isotope, Marc and I. Any kind of standouts for you, Marc?
Yeah, that was one of them. As far as moments are concerned, my number one moment was meeting both of you guys in person, finally, after all these months and talking in chats and phone calls and Google Meets and Instagram direct messages and all that stuff. To meet you guys in person and get to share in a handshake and a hug. I mean, that was one of my highlights. Meeting Aaron, hopefully he won't be mad at me.
I struggle with that one too.
Meeting him was really cool. He and I had been talking for a while, and he came to see. He actually sought me out, found me, and when we went to go see the TGN talk, he pulled out the watches and put them on my leg. I'm like, oh, look at that! And so I took some pretty good pictures off of my knee as I was trying to listen to TGN, and yeah, those are really cool to see. And if you go back and read his bio on the site. I mean, he worked for McGonigal. If you guys ever heard of these guys out of Ireland who make these complicated, handmade, beautiful watches. He had worked on a Kari Voutilainen watch. He had worked on some restorations of some Breguets and all kinds of other stuff. I mean, he's a watchmaker of the highest order. So it's very cool to have seen him. Apart from that, meeting a lot of the guys, like you said, a lot of the guys behind the brands, Trip from Loci, Phil from Visitor, Jose from Isotope, having worked the booth with him. That was one of my highlights. I had no plans in hanging out there all day or for 2 days. I wanted to go and hang out with Bob for a bit. And I knew that once I've done the rounds a couple of times with all the tables, I would need something to do. So I went over to the Isotope booth. Bob was there, and being the YouTube star that he is, especially in our little universe, he was being pulled left and right by other people, take pictures with you, got to go see that guy, so Jose was left alone. So I hung out with him, and he's such a personable man and so knowledgeable and so much fun. And his watches reflect all that personality, right? And the more time I spent at the booth, the more time I spent with the watches, the more I learned about the itty bitty little details that went into his designs. And seeing the reactions from people walking up to the booth who's never heard of Isotope or had never seen them before, and explaining all those little things that I just discovered myself and seeing their reactions, that was worth doing all day, twice. So that was a fun time. Yeah, the TGN event also that we attended afterwards on Saturday night, meeting Hutton and James Stacey in person. I got to spend a considerable amount of time with both of them each. That was wonderful as well.
Sorry, before we get to Bob's highlights, I just want to jump on something you said, Marc, particularly about Aaron. He and I had been communicating in DMs leading up to the show. So finally meeting him and getting to see those watches, the ones he dropped on your knee like that, he actually allowed me to take one up to the hotel room so that I could photograph it in some better light. And I'm hoping that we're going to be able to arrange something in the future. But we're talking about very, very valuable watches and the time that goes into them. And like you say, he's building things from the ground up. And this is homegrown Canadian talent. So I have to say, yeah, that was absolutely a huge highlight as
in Saskatoon.
Yeah, in Saskatoon of all places. And also the Jose, clearly, like for Caroline, I think she would say that Jose was the highlight of her weekend. I mean, she just kept coming back to take a look at that Revolution Mercury LE that he had there, and I really thought she was going to walk away with it at one point. So yeah, great.
Oh, I have one more highlight that I forgot to mention. After the TGN event, when we were coming back to the hotel, running into Jason Hutton and Jose at the bar, and getting a couple of drinks, and then sitting there till 2:00 in the morning, just yapping it up. That was a big highlight. I think that I wouldn't have done anything different. It was fantastic.
Nothing like late night chats for sure. So Bob, your highlights.
Yeah, so for me, obviously the watches were awesome, but same as you guys, it's all about the people. A fellow like Jose, I've known him. I actually received his first prototype ever when he started, I think 7 years ago now, and I believe I was the first person to sort of present it on social media at the time, and I've had this relationship with him for years, and it was just great to kind of get some FaceTime with a guy like that. So many other people too. Say obviously the three of you guys. My favorite photo from the show is the three of us that your wife Caroline took, Brent, and I've posted that a couple of times now on
posted again today.
Yeah. So that was a highlight. It was fun meeting Dan, the Dansome Dan man. He was quite the character and a lot of fun to spend some time with. And then just so many of the watch fam, you kind of know from Instagram, their Instagram handles or their YouTube handles from the comment section on YouTube, and just putting a face to the name was so much fun. A lot of fun.
Absolutely. Not to toot our own horn or anything, but what surprised me, and I know it surprised both of you because we've already had this discussion, and that was that people would actually stop us on the show floor and say, "Hey, love the podcast." And that was a surprise for me. I did not anticipate that occurring. So that was a lot of fun too.
I was getting even from brands as well. Like we walked away with a lot of connections for potential guest hosts. I know that from the show, but I was shocked about that myself too. Yeah.
That picture that was taken, the three of us, was from Bob's phone. Now we know that the pictures were taken also with your camera, Brent. So if you can dig those up, I'd like to get them.
Will do.
I was just going to ask if there was any standout. We talked about some moments. There's quite a number of moments. Maybe we'll get to more. But was there any standout watches for you guys at the show?
Wow. Yeah, that's a question and a half. So, I mean, beyond sort of what I would call my best in show, which was the Ulysse, there were just some brands that it was so good to see up close. I'm going to start with Fears. I had a chance already when I was in Time to Watches in Geneva earlier in the year to see the Garrick, but I didn't have that much time with it. And so to actually be able to pick it up and take a look at this thing, it's got their in-house UTG04 movement. Garrick actually has a proprietary exclusive alloy circumet that's on the inside of this thing. It's absolutely stunning from an aesthetic point of view. What a watch, honestly. But even just what they recently released, I think it was 4 days before the show started, their Jump Hour. I love the Raven Black. I love the bracelet that's on it, and that cushion case, that onion dome crown. Absolute highlights for sure for me. And then I think too, it was a lot of fun to see brands that really spoke to me, I think. And one of those is Sphaera. They're from Salzburg, Austria. I really like what they're doing with their sort of forged Damascus styles. But still, I think my favorite is probably that Epic Classic. I think they nickname it the Rusty. That's got the kind of the sort of bronzed screw heads that are in it, and those gorgeous hands. Really, really like the tooly look of those things. And speaking of tool watches, Elliot Brown. An absolute highlight for me. And you know what I really like their Hutton Auto GMT, their sort of Beachmaster Nevo. It didn't really matter which one it was. What I loved is that the way they integrate their straps, it just feels like it's part of the whole watch experience. So these beautiful tools, ultimately very robust. Doesn't matter whether they were automatic or had the Ronda quartz. They were just excellent pieces. Vortic watches. I love what Vortic is doing. This idea of reclaiming these kind of lost pocket watches from American horological history and recasing them. I mean, marriage watches are not brand new, but what they're doing, I think, and the way they're approaching it is wholly new, and they are really something to behold. I know that you guys spent a lot of your time less than 3 feet away from these guys when you were manning the Isotope booth, so the very, very cool stuff, absolutely. And then, of course, just looking at Christopher Ward and Marathon, who were clearly, for a lot of the people that went to the show, highlights, as was Oris. And seeing how they were 3 people deep for most of the Saturday and Sunday, just people clamoring to get a hold of their watches. I was wearing the Osar D from Marathon for a lot of the weekend, which is their new release. And of course, Oris itself, they have so many amazing pieces. It's hard to pick a favorite. I know that the Diver 65 always spoke to me, but the Aquis has really grown on me over the years. And I still stand by the fact that the Pro Pilot X might be one of the most comfortable wrist experiences I've ever had. So yeah, just I don't know. I feel like a kid in a candy store.
How about yourself, Marc? Any standout watches?
Yeah, the standout watches for me, was Atelier when I've seen pictures of them. I'm not a huge integrated bracelet guy by any stretch of the imagination, but seeing these in person, the level of attention to detail to the dials, the clasp by far the best class of all the brands that were out there. It is short. It has a slider mechanism so that it opens up. It has a push button micro adjust, which is tiny. It all fits in this tiny little package of perfection, to be honest. And what was really surprising is that they made one out of tantalum, which is nearly as dense as platinum. So this watch was well into the 300 grams range. And they had the exact same watch in titanium. So both metals are dark. Both watches had purple dials. And when you held them, your brain had a hard time understanding that one felt like a ton of bricks and the other one felt like feathers, but they looked identical. It was really cool to see. Minase, I was lucky enough to walk at that booth and when there was nobody there. And the gentleman behind the counter with the gloves on walked me through their entire line. And just to see how everything's constructed and the attention to detail again with the dials, and it looks like the movement's floating in space. They had one watch that had 7 sapphire crystals around it. So the sides, every side, the top, the bottom, either side of the crown, it was really impressive. Again, the Fierce Garrick, you had mentioned that one, Robi. If you didn't know that was special metal, it didn't look anything special because it's dark and it's pretty plain. But to see it in person, and if you held it at the right angle and you saw the blued hands, the properly heat-treated blued hands, and the escapement on the front of the dial, it was spectacular. I managed to see the jump hours at the Montreal Red Bar that happened the week before on the Wednesday. So I didn't spend a lot of time with Fierce at the show because I had spent time with Nick and their watches, except for the Garrick. He didn't bring it to Montreal, so that was a treat. Christopher Ward was awesome, but again, I spent time with them at the Red Bar a few days before, and they, like you said, they're 3 or 4 people deep, so I didn't want to bother them with my stupidity, so I leave them alone. Aaron Sauer, we mentioned those were spectacular, and then Selten, a little brand that makes some pretty spectacular watches with mother of pearl dials that are sliced and intertwined with each other. I don't know if I can explain it. You'd have to see a picture. Really special. Martial Lab was really cool too. I wrote a quick release for them, I don't know, months ago. And it was really neat to see them in person. And the 2 ladies that were manning the booth were very personable, funny, very smiley. And they adored the fact that I spoke French, that they were able to speak French to me. And they displayed all their wares. And then they had this one little surfer diver thing that sat on the corner in the back that really stood out to me. It was had a really cool domed sapphire crystal, smaller dial, bigger bezel kind of thing. It looked really neat. But yeah, and Loci, my buddy Trip there, seeing his watches in person. And I made a couple of mistakes over the show with certain booths that I went to see that, I had either had a relationship with the person behind the counter and wanted to see the watches so badly and wanted to play with them and talk. I didn't take any pictures. So Loci was one of them. I spent 2 days at the Isotope booth, and I have one picture of the watch behind somebody else's watch. so that was a mistake also. But anyways, yeah. And of course, Isotope, seeing all those cool designs in person, all those, the Hydriums, all the different ones, with the fire escape room, fire exit man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fire exit man one, the lighting it up and showing other people. It was really cool. And, all their designs. I mean, the mirror one, the
Mercury.
The Mercury, that was spectacular. I think I sold one while I was standing there. This guy kept on coming back, and I let him wear it for a bit. We were talking, and then he goes, "I'll take it." I'm like, "Oh, Jose." So yeah, it was a lot of fun, man. I had a great time. Those are my standouts. What about you, Bob?
I will just comment on the Mercury because that is quite the impressive watch in person. I know your wife Brent was quite smitten with that one too. But speaking with Jose on what it takes to make that watch, like you cannot have a speck of anything on that dial, and if you do, it's a throwaway. And I believe he said it's somewhere in around the 60% mark are throwaways. So that it's impressive to see. It's a
concave dial.
Yeah,
it's a concave dial. If you to make him going back his spiel, I heard it 1,000 times.
Yeah,
the dial itself, instead of having a flat dial, it would be just a mirror looking right back at you.
Yeah.
Right. So it's concave, so you don't get that mirror direct effect, though it is highly polished. So it's this really, really neat effect. It's very impressive.
What's the other thing that's neat about that I hadn't even thought of is because of the finish of the dial, the underside of the hands have to be finished just as good as the top, because you can see the reflection, so there's so many little details that happen with the watch like that. Another one from Isotope is their new Moonshot chronograph, which I think they're shipping the first batch of those this month. A little experience that I had when it comes to watches that was a highlight was on the Friday night, Sean Bush, that works with Marathon, handed me the OSAR just to get a couple of pics and keep overnight, take it for a little test drive. And on the Saturday, I was wearing that watch. I had an Isotope on one and the OSAR on the other at the Isotope booth. And there's quite a bit of attention given to the OSAR. So I had to quickly remove that before I got fired by Jose for the weekend. But another cool one of the tables right directly across from Isotope was Micromilspec. And they have that, I think it's called the Milgraph, which is a very tooly GMT chronograph. Is that what it's called, Marc? I believe you were kind of into that one too.
Yeah, it is called
I think it's the
Micromilspec launches Milgraph. Yeah, you're correct. I'm actually writing about that one for Warner Wound. I've got to do that piece tonight.
Very cool. Yeah, I really like that one. My big issue with the show is it partly because of working at the booth is I actually missed a lot of watches and people that I wanted to spend some time with. On the Friday, I've told you guys probably, was the only real fully free night that I had at the show. And I went to, so if you haven't been to the show, there was essentially 3 rooms, almost a lobby that had Oris and a few brands surrounding. There was a larger room and then a smaller room just up the stairs. So I went to that smaller room first on the Friday night around 6:00. We had till I think 9:30 that night for that creators night. And I only made it about 2/3 away around that room and the night was over. You know what I mean? You're just talking. It's hard to spend 5 minutes at a booth. I spent quite a bit of time with Sinziana that I've worked with in the past, and you can't just do a 5-minute, conversation. I spoke with her for a good half an hour or so. That's kind of my biggest regret. Not enough time, which is kind of ironic being at a watch show, but yeah, that was the situation for me. But yeah, there was a lot of great watches to see. One of the other cool things that happened was all of the other little get-togethers. I've been calling them sideshows, but the get-togethers that sort of developed around the show. You hosted one with RZE, Brent. I have to do a little plug for my YouTube channel. Just this morning, I posted a video on their new Fortitude GMT, the new Sunburst dial versions, which are really nice. But tell us a little bit about some of your experiences, with that show. We've talked about it earlier today, Brent, but that get-together was definitely a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, RZE is a brand that is, I think, a growing concern, a growing micro brand, but they still don't necessarily have the kind of money to join every single show around the world, wind-ups and Time to Watches and Toronto Timepiece Show, but they want to be present and they want people to get their watches in hand, which of course is the number one best thing about a watch show, particularly when it's about independent watch producers, is these are not the things that you can normally get your hands on. So to be part of it, they donated a watch actually as one of the giveaways to the show. And because we have been working together for at least 3 years, Huey from RZE and I sort of concocted this idea that, well, geez, after the creators night is over, why don't we have a get together? And so we issued, our invitations, and we had maybe 30 people respond positively. So we knew we were going to have a nice crowd. We were at Hair of the Dog Pub, which was literally 2-minute walk away. And, in the beginning, we started at around 9 because we knew some people were not going to be at the creators event. And we wanted them to be able to come and have a place to sit and have a drink. RZE provided swag for the first 20 people. They provided the first drink, and we provided some food for everybody. But by about 9:45, once the people at the show had sort of closed up shop, it got pretty hectic. There were well beyond the people that had responded that they were going to go. We had the entire team from Christopher Ward there, everybody from Fears that was there. We had Baltic there. We had Fire and Swit. We had, and so it was like this wonderful gestation of people just chatting about watches, chatting about the show, chatting about, traveling. And a lot of us had been in touch with each other for a good 3 or 4 years and never really met face to face. So that was a lot of fun. And I know, Bob, you were there, so you got to experience it. Marc, you didn't get there until the day after, so I can't wait to throw the next one so that you can be there as well. But it was fantastic. You know who else was there actually? And Marc, you mentioned this brand already, Selten. So Leo was there, and so was Christine Lamb, who runs Has No Bounds, and they're just the cutest couple in the world, honestly. So they make great watches. They make incredible straps. So I should probably give them a shout out here. In fact, I'm going to be hitting Christine up probably for that new Omega that I have, because it definitely needs some nice new leather. So, it was just such a wonderful atmosphere. It went a lot longer than we anticipated it going. We had some giveaways that were there that night, and it was just, I suppose it was like the culmination of a lot of years of just, laying the groundwork for something like this, and then seeing it come to fruition. And I think that's the same way it was for Jason and the show. So yeah, absolutely fantastic.
Just one thing on Jason. This is probably actually one of the most emotional moments of the show for me, and I 100% know it was for him, is when Jason walked in to the pub that night and received a standing ovation, and you could see the emotion in his face. That was really cool to see.
Absolutely. It was one of the few moments where there was even a modicum of relaxation in his face, because he was tense and worried and like a mother hen the entire show, making sure that things all came off exactly the way they were supposed to. The only other time where I turned to Caroline and said, look at Jason right now, was Sunday. And that was when he noticed that the lineups outside were double the size they were the day before. And normally the second day of a show is the wind down day, and it felt like it was just winding up all anew. And he knew at that point, this has been a huge success. And he could finally take a breather. He could finally enjoy the fruits of all that labor, etc. So it was really something. It was awesome to experience.
It was incredible on Sunday. The lineups were all day. There was a 45-minute to an hour and a half wait to get in the entire day. And everyone I spoke to said, we didn't care. We wanted to go in. We were having a good time outside with everybody. We came in. We had a great time. No one really cared about the lineups. It was fantastic. And the way it was dispersed, it was all my fears that I had about, the 3 or 4 people deep at all the booths, apart, again, from Marathon and Christopher Ward. It wasn't the case. There were people everywhere, but it was very manageable, and there was all kinds of side conversations happening everywhere. And if there was waiting, no one seemed to mind. Just to go back to Jason and how he was feeling, is when we ran into him on that Saturday night, and we were having a couple of drinks at the bar, and I told him, I said, no matter what happens on Sunday, you've already succeeded, right? The Friday was fantastic. The Saturday was fantastic. Like, you've already won. So whatever happens on Sunday is just gravy. And it was even better than gravy, because it was the best day of the show. So good for him. So proud of what he's done and being his friend. And, whatever I can do that can help him moving forward for the Vancouver show or the Toronto show, he knows that he has my support. I'm sure he has your support as well. It's just a great guy. So happy for him.
I had a moment of realization with how much work was put into this on the Thursday before the show. So I own a pickup truck, and I offered myself and my truck to Jason weeks ahead of time. If you need it, and he immediately accepted my offer. So on Thursday morning, I went to his house to pick up just the amount of stuff, all of the signage, all of those big signs that were behind each of the booths, the programs, 2,000 programs. That's a lot of weight. We loaded his vehicle and mine But I remember him talking about sort of coordinating getting stuff to the show from other brands too, Oris and things that are getting shipped in. So when we arrived at the hotel with our load, and we went to this little back room where everything was, it wasn't little, it was a big room. It was full of boxes of things that we were also contributing more boxes to. But I can remember thinking to myself, holy, how is this even going to be put together by tomorrow night? But he pulled it off, man. He aced it totally.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was amazing.
So the one thing that I walk away from with the show is I feel very rejuvenated when it comes to watches. Sometimes doing what we do, you can suffer a little bit of burnout, but I just feel just the amount of energy that we all received from each other has been amazing to me.
Yeah, it sure has.
I was talking to Rhonda Reish in the days after the show as well as at the show, and she had stood up during the TGN podcast, and she had basically got the room to applaud just by saying, haven't you all had a great time? And then she contributed a bit of voiceover for a recent video we put up on the YouTube channel. And after I sent her a link to the YouTube video, she fired back and she said, I don't think that I have come down from this yet. And we were like 9 days later at that point. And I felt exactly the same thing. I understood exactly what she meant. It was such a success. And Caroline had said, we need more weekends like this in our life. And it didn't have to do with watches, really. It had to do with people.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah, Bob and I were talking yesterday evening saying the same thing. I've spent my entire career wanting to be in and around the watch industry. I started writing about it in the 90s and all that stuff, and I've been involved in a bunch of different watch communities online, on the forums, moderating, and all this other stuff. This was the culmination of all of that. And I haven't been able to get down from that high. And right now, that's all basically I want to do is be around this and help you guys out and help our podcast grow. And I took so many pictures at the show, and I could have taken so many more. I've used every single one of them on Instagram, some twice. And again, I failed on a couple of them that I should have taken. But yeah, I'm having a hard time getting back down from this, and I'm looking forward to hopefully going to the Vancouver show and helping Jose out again. I think it's going to be great. It's in April, and there's a red bar. And right now, there's a red bar next week on the 17th, Thursday in the evening that I'm going to go to. That should be fun as well.
It seems like your red bar in Montreal is basically single-handedly revived by the Toronto Timepiece Show.
Yeah, it did. Well, look, the last red bar that happened because Fears, Christopher Ward, and Studio Underdog decided to do a road show, and they showed up at the red bar. They were going to do Toronto, so Montreal got looped in, and that was a good success. There was at least 100 people there, surprisingly, and it was a good success. And the new guy who's managing the red bar account, Jonathan, seems to have a good control over it. But hopefully it's revived, and now we finally have a proper red bar.
Yeah, that's cool.
Another one of those shows that happened, side shows, was the TGN Marathon event on the Saturday night. And Robi and I went there after having supper with Dan from Dansum, and Tyler, one of Calibrated Wrist's writers, and Phil from Visitor, as well as Robi's wife, Caroline. And we had a nice supper at a neat diner, and then headed over to the TGN event, which was held at Marty's place. Marty is their VP of something, and his place is an old converted firehouse, which had, those wooden rafters, and it was just a beautiful place. This big, giant, long kitchen, and everybody, was piled in there, and it was neat. We ran into the guy that sells the marathon watches with the red marathon Jeep.
Sean Bush Outdoors, yeah.
Sean Bush Outdoors. So we ran into him, talked to him for a while, and then we got there a little late, so people started dissipating, which is good because then we had access to Jason and James, and we got to speak to them. And there was a certain point where I was talking to James Stacy with Marty and another collector. It was a really, really good time, and we left there. It was like 10:30 or something. It was supposed to finish at 8:30, and we left at 2 hours later. So yeah, it was an awesome time.
Another contributor to your video, Brent, is Jamie that flew in from Newfoundland that I hosted at my house. We were talking about the energy level, and it's how it's sort of sustained still, even a couple of weeks later. And he's part of the reason. I speak with him almost daily, and he's constantly coming up with new stories that I didn't hear before. He spoke highly of Beauregard, and also his most expensive watch that he's ever handled in person. We had a little adventure on the side on the Friday morning. I picked him up, which was when you guys were recording with Ricky from Scottish Watches on the last episode. I came home to a broken dryer. So Jamie and I tore that apart, and without success in the end. So I was actually doing some appliance shopping during the show as well, a little on the sly. So
wasn't there an incident that happened with one of your friends that had a heart attack that came to the show or something like that? And then Jamie went out of his way to do a little swag bag collection thing and went to visit the guy and all that stuff. What happened there?
Yeah, this is Don Rogan, and when I first launched my account on Instagram, Don was one of the OG Instagrammers, and he's an amazing photographer. Not to mention he has a very sly sense of humor, and he's always been kind of like an idol of mine on the platform, and I thought, well, hey, we're finally going to meet each other. We missed each other once when I was out in Calgary, and there was a snowstorm, and we couldn't join up, and because he's from Edmonton. And then, he had a really unfortunate incident leading up to the show. So Jamie, who was also a good friend of his, at least online, we got together a pretty significant swag bag for him, and Jamie ran over and saw him for lunch and gave him the bag. So this is the kind of community we're talking about, right? Like, this is what a great thing. What a great thing.
Amazing thing.
But, Jamie in general is a great guy. Like the fact that he would tear apart, he would come all the way from Newfoundland, tear apart your dryer unsuccessfully. But he's the sort of guy that I unquestionably, if you called him in the middle of the night and said, man, my basement's flooded, he'd be there with a bucket. Yeah. Like that's the kind of people.
Yeah, I was going to say he's my closest friend, like in the watch community, but he's actually probably my closest friend, period. We've had gone through ups and downs in life together, and he's been sort of a go-to phone a friend through thick and thin. So, well, I think, is there any other topics you guys would like to talk about before we wrap things up for the day?
Well, I mean, before we sign off, I will just say that, there were a couple other talks that I got a chance to moderate, and there were a couple of others that I got to at least view. And I have to say that some of these things that were watch related, but not necessarily about watch brands, were so interesting to have at the show. Julie Kraulis, Dan Tanenbaum, Sinziana, Iordache. These people, their talent and their commitment to their craft and their intelligence and wit, it was wonderful to witness. So I really feel like we have to just talk about them a little bit. And there were unrelated brands that were at the show too, like that fellow from Standard H. Boy, I still regret to this day not buying that Willie's shirt jacket that they had, because now I'll have to pay duty on it when I do buy it. But it was these kind of people that just fleshed out what was already going to be a successful show.
Yeah, Dan
Tanenbaum.
I was just going to say, he was a highlight for me. He was quite a character. I met him in the lobby outside of the hotel, I think on the Friday, and he had his dunny there. So I asked him if I could get a selfie with him, which he obliged. But he was a really interesting person, somebody that I've known forever through Instagram and had never met in person. Rhonda Reich, I had a really nice conversation with her. I'd never spoken with her until you were there as well, Marc, I believe.
Yep. She was awesome.
And another guy that kind of stood out to me that I just missed at these type of events and never quite connected with was Justin Frost. He's an editor at Sharp Magazine. He was a really good guy to talk to too. He was telling me and showing me his fresh ink that he had just gotten the night before the show. And so we kind of connected on that a little bit. But yeah, It's so many. There's so many people. I'm sure we're going to end up forgetting some of them, but what a show.
Yeah, Dan was awesome. I like you, been talking to him for literally years, and he was tucked away on the side of the main room, and I'd walked in, and he's like, "Hey, Marc," turn around, and I saw his little statue things, and to see those things in person, the Watch Parts motorcycle, if anybody wants to look him up on Instagram, just phenomenal stuff. To hold it, man, how heavy it actually is, and to see all the intricate little itty bitty details that he's put into his art. Yeah. I don't know if we'll live this down. I'm hoping that Vancouver is going to be equally cool, and next year Toronto is going to be. The brands that didn't participate are going to really want to participate. Yeah.
Plans are already taking place for myself to get out to Vancouver. I'll be there 100%, possibly with a large group like you fellas coming from the East Coast by the sounds of things. So
we might be able to charter our own plane.
Yeah. So really looking forward to that. The venue looks really cool out there. Toronto next year, I'm not sure if Jason has shown you any pictures. He probably doesn't want to announce the actual venue, but the next year's venue looks great too for the Toronto Timepiece Show. A little bit more space.
A lot larger, and it's got those extra breakout rooms. Yep. So yeah, I can only imagine what will happen.
Yep. Yeah, it was definitely a standout. So many little things that were happening that you don't normally see at a show like this. One was the talks that you guys were doing. We have the Grey NATO doing a live podcast. It was just an amazing event.
Well, guys, seems like another one in the can. What an incredible experience. I'm glad we had a chance to convene and talk about this together, because I like both of you, I think it was still all just up in the air and around my head, and I couldn't talk to people enough about it.
Yeah, agreed. My kids and wife are sick of it.
Yeah. The funny thing is, I know that we're going to get off of the show here today. I'm going to be thinking, oh man, I forgot about this moment or that moment, because there were so many things happening at the same time. But wow, it was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So that is it. Really appreciate everybody tuning in today. Thanks so much. And we'll catch you in the next one.
Cheers.
You got it. See you next time.
Time to Calibrate is available anywhere you can listen to fine podcasts, so please do subscribe, like, and hit all those bells and whistles. It does make a difference. Until next time, thanks for listening.